All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. For those people who are late, that's their loss. Okay, clearly we all have dealt with or aware of all the changes that have happened and the commission structure, who pays for what, how it all works. I am not here to debate the changes. None of us can change it. I think a lot of us have opinions, and some of them are different as far as what we think it's going to take, how the world's going to operate. I've talked to some realtors who say, John, everything is changing, and it's going to be a very, very different world on how we negotiate. Other realtors who said nothing is changing, and we're going to continue doing things business as usual. We're just changing how we talk about it. I have my opinion, and it may come through this presentation, but the truth is I don't care what you think. None of us are right. It's going to be what it's going to be. But what we have to figure out is, how do we work through the challenges that this is going to create? I had a client, as a matter of fact, just last week over the weekend, wrote an offer and I'm not going to use the correct car forms. I haven't memorized them all yet, but checks the box on the top of page 2 that says the SPBB, I don't know, you guys are going to correct me, where the seller is paying the buyer broker agreement, and check that box, and the buyer broker agreement said 2.5%. But in the counteroffer, the seller said, I'm only going to pay 1.5%. So we ended up with a 1% gap in that situation. We're going to run into situations where we're going to have a full gap. The entire amount of money that you asked for and you agreed with the buyer to have them pay you, and you're going to have a complete gap. And there's a lot of debate about what's the right approach. How do we move forward? What steps do we take to ensure that you're not working for free? Because I don't want you working for free. You don't want to work for free. The sad truth is, we're in commission sales. Every day we work for free. If you have a buyer that wants a 3% credit to pay for closing costs, and they were out shopping in 2020 and 2021, you were working for free, because you weren't going to be able to get an offer accepted, very unlikely, with getting that 3% credit for closing costs. So you did a lot of work. The deal never closed because you couldn't structure the transaction that met the needs of the buyer. The truth is, nothing is different now. It's exactly the same. Now, half of you are going to say, forget it, John, I'm out of here. That's nothing new. No, I got some really cool techniques and ideas for you to consider and ways that we can make this work. But the key is, nothing is different. We all work not knowing if we're going to get a paycheck. And so you have to figure out, how do I make all parties in the transaction happy? How do I make sure that everyone is getting what they want, including you getting paid, including the transaction? We got a comment, by the way, guys, feel free to post comments in here. Eric said, I had a dude call me yesterday, no income due to injury, maybe receiving $100,000 per year settlement, looking to buy. Oh, he's giving me, needs a lender. Okay, well, hey, thank you, Eric. I thought that was a question and said it's a lead. Feel free, guys, to send me leads through chat. Happy during this call to get leads from chat. I thought you were asking me a question, Eric. No problem. I will give you a call. All right. So let's dive in really and talk about how I'm looking at this and what I think you should be looking at. So first of all, this is all about negotiation. So you got to first of all figure out, what does the seller want? Now, John, this is nothing different than we've been doing all along. I agree. What does the seller want, though? The seller wants the highest net. Does everybody agree? Is that all the seller wants? By the way, feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to post into chat. Is the highest net the only thing the seller wants? Anybody?
Not
Bueller?
Not always. Depends on what they need.
Depends on what they need.
It
So,
depends on what's offered. It depends on when they need to, if they need to buy another house, and it's a time frame, that kind of thing can happen.
Yep. So there's terms. It's price and it's terms. So Beth said, sell quickly. I agree. That's part of terms. How long is the close of escrow? What other terms? Are you giving me a rent back or not? But the other one that I really like is the highest probability of success. Give me the most money with the highest likelihood it's going to happen. Now, how do we see that play out? We see that play out in cash buyers. The cash buyer has the highest likelihood of success. It doesn't mean that it's going to close, but it means that you don't have to worry about that pesky, annoying lender. You don't have to worry about that pesky, annoying appraiser. So you have less hurdles in the way between you and successfully closing the escrow. So there's a lot of people who take, as a seller, and you guys would know this as listing agents as well, they take the bird in the hand approach. I'd rather have a bird in the hand than two in the bush. I'm going to take the more sure thing than necessarily the highest net, but the other terms, the rent back. What am I paying for the rent back? How quickly can you close? How long can you extend the close of escrow? What are the needs and nuances of the seller? That's critical. Okay. But now you got to think about also, what does the buyer want? Do they want the best price? Do they want the best payment? By the way, the best payment doesn't always come from the best price. Do they want the best cash to close? You can have the high payment, a high price, but the lowest possible cash to close. The truth is, it depends on the buyer's circumstances. And part of what we're talking about here when it comes to commission gaps has everything to do with what does the buyer want. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a, well, hey, if you are short by this amount, do this, it solves the problem. It's up to the buyer to figure out what's best for them. But the final thing you need to know is, what do you want? Now, the truth is, the listing agent got what they want. The listing agent got the listing, they negotiated their fee. As long as they close, they're getting what they expected. Now, they want a great transaction. They want great partners to work with. All of those things are true. But the truth is, a listing agent already knows what they want. But what do you want? You want to get paid for the work that you do. And that's what I am hearing a lot of realtors being stressed out about. And so what's your process in this new world? That's the question. I'm going to go through numbers. I'm going to show you some strategies. But I want to first point out, you have to think through, what is your process? Now, for a lot of you, your process probably, hold on, hit the wrong button here. Let's fix that. All right. Your process probably looks like, well, I'm going to call the listing agent in advance. And I'm going to ask them, how much, if anything, is their seller willing to pay towards the buyer broker's compensation? Now, I don't know that that's the best idea. That's my personal opinion. I told you in the beginning I wasn't going to tell you my opinion. I'm telling you my opinion. My opinion is that doesn't guarantee a darn thing for you. Just because they said that they're offering 2.5%, if someone else asked for 2%, can they take that offer instead of yours at the same price with all the same terms? Of course they can. There's no obligation for them to, hey, if you met all the other terms, it's not fair that you didn't accept my offer because I asked for what you told me your seller was willing to pay. Willing to pay. Not contractually obligated. Not an expert in the new car forms. But I'm pretty sure that my reading of the listing agreement says there's only a spot for seller concessions if you're paying a seller concession. That is very, very different than paying for the buyer's agent's commission. And I'm going to pause for a second here because I didn't create a slide about this, and I'm going to jump on my high horse. There is so much confusion out there, and I want to be clear on how I believe the rules are and what I believe it's going to end up being. And that is that when you look at the top of the second page of the California Residential Purchase Agreement, it has the first checkbox that says seller credits. That, any number that goes in there is counted towards the maximum concession the seller is allowed to get. 3% on a conventional loan if it's under 10% down, 6% if it's 10 to 25% down, 9% if it's over 25% down, 2% if it's an investment property, 6% if it's an FHA loan, 4% plus other fees if it's USDA. Okay. I don't care that you memorize those, but I am telling you, if the number shows up in that top line on the second page of the RPA, that counts towards interested party contributions because it matters who pays the money. This whole NAR lawsuit was about who pays the money. The whole NAR lawsuit was about and I know there's a lot more to it, and I'm totally simplifying this, but I think you would agree. It's all about the legality of the listing agent collecting money that is then split to two different parties. But many people say, John, nothing is changing because the seller will still pay for it. As a listing agent, I'll tell the seller that's the right thing to do. The difference is the seller doesn't pay the listing agent. The seller pays the buyer, or the seller pays the buyer's agent. You're right. It's the same dollars, but the new settlement agreement says it matters how it is described. It matters who the money flows to. In the lending world, it matters that way too. In the lending world, if it is on the top line of page 2 of the California RPA that was just released last month, that is a contribution towards the cap. That means the seller is paying the buyer and the buyer is paying the fee. Now, the fee is the buyer's agent's commission. You're going to tell me Fannie Mae said the buyer's agent's commission does not count as an interested party contribution. Read what Fannie Mae said again. If the seller pays the buyer's broker for their commission, not if the seller pays the buyer to pay the buyer for the buyer to pay their broker's commission, but if the seller pays the buyer broker's commission, it does not count as an interested party contribution. It has to go straight from the seller to the buyer's broker. It cannot go from the seller to the listing agent to the buyer's broker because that was prohibited from the settlement. And it can, by the way, go from the seller to the buyer's broker. But if it does, it counts as a seller credit that goes towards the maximum allowed seller credits. I didn't really think about that as I was putting this together, but I cannot message that enough. Use the third line on page 2 of the RPA that says you're using the SPBB, seller paid and buying broker, SPBB. Use that third line because anything there is obligated that the seller pays the buyer's broker directly through the settlement statement, and it is not a buyer fee. It does not count towards the buyer's maximum credits. But the bottom line is, let me get back to where I was saying, the current process in this new world for a lot of people is I'm a called listing agent. I already explained why that isn't really helpful as a buyer's agent because they can get a better offer. I'll also tell you that some people have said that why would I show a property if they're not willing to pay? If my buyer is not able to pay and the seller did not say they're willing to pay, or they're saying, hey, write it in the contract, then I'm not going to show the property because clearly my buyer has given me instructions not to show that property. So I'm not steering. I'm legally showing them properties that are only the ones that they can qualify to buy. Well, I'm going to fix that today because I'm going to show you today how every single buyer in most situations can afford to pay your buyer broker compensation. And you now get to write offers on the homes that everybody else is avoiding. That everybody else is saying, I'm not going to write an offer on that house because the seller isn't offering any money up front. And so your competition drops significantly. Well, let's use those properties as the one that you're going to get a deal for your buyer. Now, I want to talk about being a listing agent for a second. If I was a listing agent, I would not be doing my seller a service if I gave away more than I needed to of their money. Think about every seller that you have. That seller has a price. They have the two prices. They have the price that they have on the listing, and they have the price they're willing to take. It would be helpful to the buyer if the buyer knew the price they were willing to take. It would make it so much easier in negotiation if the buyer knew the price that the seller was willing to take. Not the list price, but the price they're willing to take. But you would not be doing your fiduciary responsibility to the seller if you told potential buyers or their agents what that number was. Yet you're going to do the same thing by saying how much the seller has already agreed to pay in commission. The seller has not agreed contractually to pay anything in commission, and everything is negotiable. And so I believe the correct standard going forward, my view, is that we don't ask, we don't care, because it's not guaranteed anyway. And as a listing agent, you are failing your seller by putting a number out there, because then the buyer's broker can rewrite their buyer broker agreement to match that dollar amount. So they were only going to ask for 2%, but because you said you were willing to give 2.5%, but a lot of buyers, agents will rewrite their buyer broker agreement for that particular property at that dollar amount. And now your seller spent more than they needed to, because if they didn't know, they might go in at 2%. So you just have to think about how all of this works together. Now, I don't care how you do business in that regard, but I have pretty strong opinions about that. But some people are calling a listing agent in advance. Doesn't guarantee the dollar amount. Some people write it in the offer and pray, which is really what I'm saying. Write it in the offer and pray. The problem is you don't know what's going to happen when it comes back lower, and you put yourself in a position that you may end up with an accepted offer, not accepted, a agreeable counter offer to the buyer and an agreeable counter offer to the seller, and the listing agent doesn't really care because the only person that was left out was you. Because they replied and said, nope, we're not paying any buyer broker compensation. We accept, the only terms we're going to change is we're not paying any buyer broker compensation. And now you're in the position of having to decide, this buyer that's been shopping for a home for a year, this is their perfect home. And my income's the only thing stopping them from getting this transaction. And they can't afford to pay me. And so now you're stuck having to make the difficult decision of saying, look, if I don't accept this offer, if they don't accept this offer, they're probably never going to buy a home. But if I demand that I'm going to get paid, then they're not going to get this home and we can't accept the offer. And one of the options that I've heard floated out there is, well, the buyer's broker has the right to back out of the transaction and let it close without you. That sucks as an option, but sucks as an option. And so I want to give your buyers a game plan going in, a game plan that says this is what happens if your contract comes back with a lower, reduced or eliminated compensation from the listing agent, from the seller, I should say. So what if in the new world, we educated the buyer prior to writing offers about what their circumstances are, about what their options are? That is what I'm proposing. That is what I believe is the game changer. And that's what I'm offering to help you and your clients do. Okay. If they had a plan to cover all of the closing costs, so all the costs, I should say, that they knew that, hey, what if it came in low? It would look like this, a little bit low, a lot low. This is what my options are. Okay. Because then you can show them any property. You don't have to worry about, hey, is this a property that they are able to cover the buyer broker compensation? Or is this a property that I've got to skip and not show them? Because here's the deal. Your peers are avoiding those properties. Your peers are putting their buyers at a disadvantage because they're not discussing this ahead of time with their lender, because they aren't working with me, because we're not having this conversation. So the solution, and I'm going to show you in a minute, is bumping the price. Now, we can always just bump the price, right? Like if we agreed on $600,000 with no buyer broker compensation, then why can't we just sell it for $618,000? Why can't we just bump the price? The seller still gets their $600,000. Is it that simple? Well, it's not. We know why, because the seller is afraid it won't appraise. And the truth is, so is everybody else. Everybody else in the transaction. You, the buyer, the lender, and the listing agent, we're all feeling the same way, which is, you know what, I'm not really sure if this is going to appraise. I think that the $600,000 it was listed at was the high end of the market. We're trying to push the high end of the market, and we don't think the property is going to appraise. Okay? Here's the truth. We're talking about a small amount of money. Like we had properties in 2020 and 2021 where we had prices going up $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 over the last list price on a home. We're not talking about that much money that's being bumped here. And in my experience, because I bumped prices a lot to pay for closing costs. This is no different than a low down payment buyer needing money to pay for closing costs. And I bumped prices a lot to pay for closing costs. And it's often included in the value. Very rarely, I would say in my experience, less than 20% of the time, probably even less than that we get a value that comes in low even after bumping the price. I had a property down in Lake Elsinore, a buyer that's buying with Dream for All that literally funded today. He's recording this afternoon. And the property was listed at $600,000. It got bid up to $640,000. And the seller said, look, I want an appraisal gap. We'll split the difference. I want an appraisal gap up to $20,000. If it falls below 620, then I'll negotiate the price lower. And the buyer was kind of freaking out. The truth is, it appraised at 640. There were no comps at 640. Nobody saw any comps at 640, but it appraised at $640,000 because good appraisers aren't there to kill deals. Good appraisers can't make up numbers. They can't fake numbers, but they certainly can see where the market is going. And the fact that now it's not automatic that the seller is paying the commission and we have to bump a price for the commission, the appraisers are going to be seeing that. That's my opinion. That's what I'm seeing. And so you've got to figure out how to make an offer the seller can't refuse. So my starting point right now is that we are in a negotiation and you are at the point where the buyer and the seller have come to an agreement on a price that doesn't include you. What do? Well, the first thing you do is guarantee bump the price, and guarantee an appraisal shortage down to the agreed upon price. Now, John, how am I doing that? We just said the buyer doesn't have the money to pay for me. So how are you proposing that we bump that price from 600 to 618 and then guarantee that if the property appraises for at least 600, we are going to complete this transaction? That, my friends, is why you're here, because I'm going to show you how that works. And in 90% of our buyers' circumstances, it's going to work beautifully, okay? But here's one way to make it even better. Give them an even greater appraisal gap coverage. What are you talking about, John? I'm talking about the $600,000 home that the truth is the seller and the listing agent were a little nervous about getting an appraisal at 600. They are freaking out about getting an appraisal at 618. What if you offered them an appraisal gap coverage down to 590? You said, hey, if the house appraises for no less than 10,000 below your original price or our original agreed price, which we've agreed to 600 without the agent's commission. I'm bumping to include the agent's commission. But as long as the house appraises for at least 590, now they're going to think you're an idiot and they're going to jump all over it. And that's kind of the point. As a buyer's agent, the point is to get the seller to think they're stupid, think you're stupid, and that they would be stupid if they rejected your offer. You make the offer so good. Alex Hormozy taught me this. Alex Hormozy is in marketing. But he says, the art of making a great offer is you make the offer so great that the person you're presenting it to feels stupid for saying no. So if you could take a house listed at $600,000, that you guys have agreed to $600,000, but they wrote you out of the deal, and you raise the price to 618, but you tell them, I'm actually going to guarantee the value as long as it comes in at least at 590. I will give you a $28,000 appraisal gap coverage if you accept my offer right now. That's a really attractive deal for a seller that was already nervous that the house was not going to appraise at 600. And they absolutely were not going to accept any price above that. And you just gave them a situation where they can't refuse your offer. So how do we do it? Well, let's look at the numbers. I'm going to give you two ends of the extreme. It works in the middle, okay? Just from a timing and presenting of numbers, I didn't want to look at too many different scenarios. So I'm going to show you if somebody's doing a conventional loan with at least 25% down payment. And then I'm going to show you if somebody's doing an FHA loan, because you're going to say, John, that's great if somebody's putting 25% down. What you tell me right now will look beautifully, wonderfully, if you're putting 25% down. But there's no way that works with an FHA loan. That's the beauty of this. So I'm going to show you right now. So let's see if I can make this wonderful little thing pop up here. By the way, you're not allowed to copy this and send it to your lender. I really don't care what you do. Hopefully you respect the fact that I know how this works and that you're willing to send your clients to me. But if that's really what you want to do, go for it. If my peers can copy this, then what do they say? Whatever, copying is the sincerest form of flattery. Like, people copying your stuff means that you're good at what you do. So if you want to copy this and send it to your lender, go for it. If you want the guy who knows how to do it because he's presenting it, send your clients to me. That's my direct ask. Okay, I am here to gain business, like Eric, who by the way, feel free to message me again, like Eric did earlier, saying you have a buyer. Okay, all right. Here's my scenario. My scenario is you got a $600,000 purchase price. The buyer's putting 25% down, so your loan amount's $450,000. You have 3% commission that you've asked for, and the seller offered nothing. So you have a gap of $18,000. So had the seller included the commission, you'd be looking at $600,000 purchase price. I'm ballparking in 3% for closing costs. The buyer had planned on coming up with $163,500. That's the plan. That's what everybody thought. Hey, I'm buying a house, 25% down. I expect $163,500. I expect a payment of $36.44. Okay. So now let's hold on. Behind door number one. So let's scooch this over. The first thing most people are going to say is, hey, courageous realtors are going to say, well, Mr. Buyer, you agreed to pay me 3% and the seller's paying nothing. And we had this conversation ahead of time that said, if the seller is unwilling to pay anything, then you're going to cover that out of pocket. And so your total cash became $181,500. And some people will say yes. Some people, that will be the end of the conversation. But for a lot of people, it won't. A lot of people don't have that extra $18,000. You're not seeing anything. Thank you for telling me that, Chris. Allow me to reshare. Hold on. Zoom issues. All right, let's go here. Let's go. Wow, the sharing completely went away. All right. Here we are, right here. Share. Beautiful. Now are you seeing it? Yes, Kathy, give me a thumbs up. Eric, I can see both of you. Can you guys see my spreadsheet? Beautiful, thank you. All right, so if the seller had included the like we proposed, our original proposal, we would have had a payment of $36.44, and we would have had $163,000 between the 25% down and the 3% in closing costs. They would need $163,500. These closing costs I'm talking about are lender closing costs, not to be confused with the buyer's agent's commission. So this is what it should have looked like. It should have looked like this, and that's what you were hoping for. But you told the seller, hey, if they don't pay it, are you willing to pay it out of pocket? And the seller says, yes, I am. That's great. If you can get those buyers, that is wonderful. Those are the buyers we all want right now. But those aren't the buyers we're going to be getting, okay? Or at least not all of us and not all the time. So now you have to look at, well, what is our next option? So let's look behind door number 2. Let's build it into the loan. A lot of people are saying, fine, you know what? We're just going to loan you more money. And that works perfectly fine, because they're putting 25% down on a conventional loan. So I'm just going to, instead of loaning you 75% of the home value, I'm going to loan you 78% of the home value. That's wonderful. Their payment goes up. They spend an extra $113 a month. Now that's way cheaper than coming up with $18,000 out of pocket. So that's the first place for a lot of people, is to say, and a lot of lenders kind of stop there and say, well, we're just going to build it into the loan amount and we're fine. Like, you know, that's okay, because we're not exceeding 80% loan to value. So we don't have mortgage insurance. Well, by the way, if you had mortgage insurance, you can pay the mortgage insurance as a one-time fee. And if you have great credit, that one-time fee is like 0.3 or 0.4% of the loan amount. It's pretty darn cheap. So even if you're at 80%, you can bump the loan amount to 83% of the value of the home. But here's, and this again adds $113 a month by building it into the loan amount. Now, let's look at the next scenario. What I propose, build it into the price. Build it into the price 100% of the time, but have an appraisal gap strategy. So we're building it into the price. We're saying, hey, we're going to offer $618,000. Mr. or Mrs. Seller, I know you countered at $600,000 and you negotiated out my buyer's agent's commission. We'd like to raise the price back up to $618,000, or raise it up to $618,000, which means if the house appraises, the buyer is actually still coming up with extra money, because they're still coming up with 25% of that extra purchase price. So they do have a little bit of extra money out of pocket. Their price is bumping a little bit. Their payment is bumping a little bit. Most people are going to be okay with that, but the seller's not, because the seller is going to say, I don't feel confident that this house is going to appraise for $618,000. I'm not moving forward. And so instead, we have to look at what happens if the appraisal comes in low. So in this situation, the appraisal came in at $600,000. Same as the original agreed upon price. You gave a gap. You said, I am willing. We're going to, in your counteroffer, you're saying we're going to bump the price to $618,000, and the seller will cover up to an $18,000 gap in appraised value. Said differently, talk to your broker about how to write this. Said differently, we are willing to proceed with no renegotiation, no negotiation of the purchase price, provided the value comes in at least $600,000. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we're just loaning them more money, just like we were loaning them more money in this in this building into the loan option. Okay, we're loaning them more money because we're just bumping their loan to value. The truth is, if they are putting 10% down and the appraisal comes in low, then their 10% down number becomes only 7% down. It represents 93% of the purchase price. So their mortgage insurance goes up a little bit. Maybe they have an extra $30 a month mortgage insurance payment, but their monthly payment stays the same. In 2020 and 2021, I taught these strategies a lot. Back then, we called them appraisal gap strategies. How do you write an offer for $50,000 above the asking price for a seller, excuse me, for a buyer that doesn't have the cash to cover the shortage? How in the world do you do that? And we talked about these strategies as a way to go into the deal saying, hey, you're going to write this offer and you have to be competitive by willing to cover the gap, but you don't have the cash to cover the gap. Most people think I'm putting 25% down, which means I've got to go back to this scenario here that says I'm putting 25% down and the house came in $18,000 less. And so I'm coming up with that $18,000 out of my pocket. If the house was appraised at 600 and your contract price is 618, they picture in their mind, I need to still put the 25% down on the purchase price and I have to cover the entire amount of the difference. That is the furthest from the truth. We're just loaning you the same amount we were planning on loaning you. It's now representing a higher percentage of the home value because the value came in lower. I hope this is making sense. I hope that these numbers help it make sense. I want to take this one step further, which is you can actually offer, and I'm going to kind of cover this stuff up so we can see it this way. You can offer a bigger gap coverage. So you can say, and I'm going to kind of compare to this stuff over here. Okay. So if the appraisal's coming in low and the appraisal comes in at $600,000, you got a purchase price at 618 and the appraisal comes in at $600,000, you're borrowing $469,000. So that's 78% of the purchase price. By the way, Fannie Mae charges a risk adjustment fee because you're borrowing 80% or between 75 and 80% instead of less than 75%. So you're paying about $1,700 extra in a one-time fee for the fact that we bumped your loan to value. Well, guess what? I can bump your loan to value all the way up to 85% and your monthly payment stays the same. So the home value could be as low as $552,000. Now, I know that I hope that I'm not losing very many of you, and I need you to, this is why you're here. This understanding right here is the game changer for your negotiation skills and getting a seller to accept your offer, okay? Because what we are saying is, hey, if the seller is worried about the property appraising at 600 and we're bumping it to 618, the truth is, if the buyer's willing to cover an extra $1,500 one-time fee, that buys out their mortgage insurance. And this is assuming great credit. This is assuming somebody who has a 780 credit score, okay? But you're talking about $1,500 of a one-time fee. I think everybody would be willing to do that to guarantee their offer gets accepted. So you are telling the seller, I'll waive the appraisal gap all the way down to $555,000. Now, maybe you don't want to go that low. The truth is it doesn't matter because they're going to pay that same bump no matter what if it falls below 600. But the chances are the appraisal is going to come in at 618. But you're taking this strategy and instead of simply saying, well, I'll cover the difference. We'll cover the gap of the $18,000. That's good, but it's not great. The offer they can't refuse is saying, hey, we're buying your house. You're getting your net of $600,000 before any of your other costs. You're getting your net of $600,000 after paying the agent's commission that you weren't willing to pay because we're raising the price to 618. But I'm doing you one better because you're worried about the appraised value. I will guarantee a value significantly less than that. That puts you on par with a lot of cash buyers. Yes, you have a loan contingency, but we can get these pre-underwritten so we can waive the loan contingency. Now you have a huge appraisal contingency waiver. You have no loan contingency. You're building in the price of your commission that they weren't willing to do. And it's costing the buyer an extra $3,000 total compared to had they gotten the house with, let's get rid of this thing right here. Had they gotten the house originally, they wouldn't have either one of these fees. No Fannie Mae risk adjusted fee, no mortgage insurance. So your buyer is paying an extra $3,000 in fees and they're paying a higher payment because they're borrowing more money. Obviously their loan amount has gone up because they're financing in the commission. So they are paying a higher payment, but they're guaranteeing the seller's single largest concern on why they weren't willing to increase the price, because they're afraid it's not going to appraise. And at the very least, you have the ability in 9 cases out of 10 to give them an appraisal gap coverage back to the original agreed upon price. But most of the time, you can go significantly better. And I am going to educate your buyers much more simpler than this. I'm walking you through it. I'm going to give a much simpler way to educate your buyers before you start shopping, so that they know, hey, my circumstance has me putting 30% down. But if the seller doesn't pay the commission, the truth is it costs me an extra $2,000 out of pocket, $1,500 out of pocket. I'm cool with that. We'll just build it into the price and we'll offer them an appraisal gap coverage. That's going to be the game changer. And this works on conventional loans all the way up to 10%. Actually, literally, the only time it's challenging is when you're putting only 5% down, because I can't bump the purchase price if you're putting 5% down. But what I can do on a conventional loan, if you're putting 5% down, is I can do a down payment assistance loan. I have down payment assistance programs that you don't have to be a first-time home buyer. So now we do a down payment assistance loan. That money they get from the down payment assistance loan, that goes to pay the buyer's agent's commission. So you think, hey, this works fine, John, when they have a big enough down payment. But what if they're at the maximum? For a conventional loan, we just put them into a down payment assistance program. And you don't have to be a first-time home buyer to get down payment assistance. So there's a way to make it work there. And I can show them that before they start shopping for homes. And they say, hey, if you find the perfect home and you cannot negotiate it into the contract, then I'm going to advise your agent to have them bump the price. And we're going to give an appraisal gap guarantee that you're not likely to need. But it says that if the appraisal comes back at the original price, you're still going to proceed. Let me show you what that looks like. And I'll show them that last scenario of what that looks like to say, this is your worst case scenario. Is that okay with you? If they say yes, you have carte blanche to go write offers on homes, even when the listing agent says the seller's not willing to pay a buyer's agent's commission, or we're not willing to disclose whether we're paying or how much we're willing to pay. Even if you end up in a negotiation and a multiple counteroffer where they negotiate out the commission or negotiate down the commission significantly, this gives you the ability to do that. Now you say, John, that's all fine and good, but most of my buyers are first-time home buyers. They're doing FHA. They barely scratch together the 3.5% down payment and the closing costs. How the heck are you going to do it for them? Because there is no money to come from anywhere else to make that work. This is actually the coolest thing, and it's going to require some imagination. Okay. So here's what you see. You see an FHA buyer. This one's assuming a 680 credit score. They're buying at 600,000, putting 3.5% down. And so they should have a payment of about $4,725 with about $38,000 needed between down payment and closing costs. And if we run into a situation where the seller says, I'm not paying any of the commission, and you have a 3% commission agreed with from the buyer, with the buyer, then the buyer's got to come up with an extra $18,000. They need $56,000, and they don't have it. You know that they don't have it. I know that they don't have it. It's why you're not showing them any of the homes that are on the market that aren't guaranteeing you a commission. None of them are guaranteeing you a commission. But it's why you're avoiding those homes. You had them sign the form. I'm pretty sure there's a form. You have them sign the form that says, I don't have money to cover the difference. And I check the box that says, don't show me homes if the seller's not willing to pay it. Everything is negotiable. And if you can give the seller a big enough gap, oh, John, hold on. How are you going to give us gap coverage when they have no extra money on an FHA loan? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with getting a refrigerator. Yeah, it has to do with getting a refrigerator. So let's keep going. I'll tell you how we get to the refrigerator in a second. So you can build it into the price, which is what I tell you. The number one thing I want you to hear coming out of here, build it into the price every time, and then offer an appraisal gap strategy. Every single time, build it into the price and then offer an appraisal gap strategy. That is the only reason. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Please raise your hand, unmute, post into chat, tell me I'm wrong. Obviously, all of the other terms matter. But if you are equal or better than everybody else in all of the other terms, and the only difference is they're not willing to raise the price because what? Because the only thing that still stands in the way of the deal closing, because you have the best terms, is that they don't want to raise the price because they don't think it's going to appraise. And when it doesn't appraise, then they're on the hook for the difference, or you have to cancel, and then that's going to lose them time, and time is critical for them. So there is no other reason for the seller to say no to a bump in price other than afraid the house is not going to appraise. So build it into the price. So the buyer ends up paying an extra $141 a month. Clearly, they have to be able to afford that. And they need about an extra $1,100 out of pocket. Not that big of a deal, okay? But what if the appraisal comes in short? So if the appraisal comes in short, go get a refrigerator. We are going to switch them from an FHA loan to an FHA renovation loan. Like 203K, a streamlined 203K. Now, mind you, let's think about how this process has come out. You wrote the offer at $600,000, asking them to pay your 3% in commission. They countered and said, yeah, we accept, but we counter back with no commission to the buyer broker. You counter back and you say, I will increase the price to buyer wants to increase the price to $618,000. And the buyer is willing to cover an $18,000 gap. So as long as the property appraises for at least $600,000, we are going to close escrow. And the buyer says, sure, I'll do it. Mind you, I said there's one better, which is offering a bigger gap. I'll get to that in a second. So the seller says, yeah, I'll do it. We go and get an appraisal done. We do a regular FHA appraisal. That appraisal gets done. The appraisal comes in at $600,000. We're in trouble. John, you said that it would appraise. And I said most of the time it'll appraise. Yeah, but John, now what? Now what are we going to do? Like, you can't loan more money on this loan because it's FHA. And so the buyer now has to come up with that extra $18,000 out of pocket. But a 203K, a renovation loan, has a unique rule. The unique rule says that they know every dollar you spend in repairs does not equal a dollar increased in value. So a renovation loan says when we look at the after improved value, what the house is worth after improvements, that home is, you cannot loan more than 110% of the after improved value. There's our loophole. You can't loan more than 110% of the after improved value. So we have a $600,000 value on a $618,000 home. Now you're going to have them go buy a $2,000 refrigerator. Okay. They're not going to buy it. They're going to pick it out. They're going to get an invoice from Lowe's for a $2,000 refrigerator. I don't care if it's a $500 refrigerator. It technically makes it. There's no minimum dollar amount for a renovation loan. It makes it a renovation loan. You can buy appliances for a renovation loan. Now, maybe they actually want to do work on the home. Since it is a renovation loan, they can actually get paint and carpet and all that cool stuff, and we can make it $20,000 in renovations. But I want to keep this simple. We're not trying to do a renovation loan. We're using a renovation loan as the loophole. So how this loophole works is this is, okay, well then we're taking that $618 plus the $2,000 in renovation cost. That equals a total acquisition of $620,000, your purchase price plus your renovation cost. The buyer has to put 3.5% down on that total acquisition. So guess what? They have to put an extra 3.5% down on $2,000. We're talking about pennies. Okay, so it's not that big of a difference in down payment from the buyer, and they actually get a new refrigerator in the end. Okay, but now I keep my loan amount the same. I keep my loan amount, it's actually a little bit higher than what it was because I'm including the cost of that new refrigerator, but I'm borrowing 99% of the appraised value. Like, John, you can't do that. You can't loan on an FHA loan 99% of the appraised value. You can on a renovation loan. We can loan up to 110% of the value. And so that person's payment is now $48.79. It's literally $13. I don't know how I lost the payment bump number, but it's literally $13 more than what it would have been if it had appraised at $618. And it's $13 more because they're actually getting their fridge and they're making a payment on that fridge for $13 a month. So there is zero difference in cash out of pocket, in monthly payment, $13. Your cash out of pocket, you were at, if it had you writing the contract at $618, had it appraised at $618, then you would have had $1,150 extra out of pocket. Because it appraised at $600, you're at $1,279 extra out of pocket. Why are you putting an extra $100 out of pocket? Because that's your down payment on the extra $2,000 for the refrigerator. Okay, you're getting the exact same deal when you build it into the price, doing a regular FHA loan and the value comes in low, then we go out and get an invoice for a refrigerator and we send the appraiser back out. Now there's going to be a $250 reappraisal fee because the appraiser has to go back out now and reappraise it, assuming there's a new refrigerator in there and telling us how much it's going to be worth with the new refrigerator. Pretty stupid, because the appraiser is going to laugh a little bit and say, really? Like, you want me to appraise this property again? Telling you what it's worth if you put a fridge in there? Like, it's worth the same. I know it's worth the same, but we have to do it. It's a formality. So that is an extra step. That's a little bit of an extra cost, but we can build that into the loan amount. So now your buyer is coming up with almost the same amount of money, almost the same cash to close, and literally we don't care that the appraisal came in low. But here's the best part. The best part is you can offer a bigger gap coverage because we can loan up to 110% of the value of the home. Meaning that if our loan amount is $598,000, the house could actually appraise as little as $543,909. And the deal stays the same. The buyer needs no extra money out of pocket. The buyer needs no extra monthly payment. The buyer doesn't have to pay for the shortage. The buyer still gets their refrigerator. I used this strategy quite a few times in 2020 and 2021. When we had a gap, by the way, you recognize this gap is literally, what are we looking at here? $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 of an appraisal gap. The appraisal in this case could be almost $70,000 below the contract price, using an FHA with just 3.5% down payment and the buyer paying their own closing costs. By the way, we can bump the price even more to have the seller pay the buyer's closing costs and give them an appraisal gap. You have sellers who say, I don't want to pay, I sure as heck am not willing to pay the agent's commission, and I really am not going to pay closing costs on top of that. We can use the same strategy to get a buyer in with no money out of pocket except their down payment. This does not work with down payment assistance. So we cannot layer a renovation loan with down payment assistance. So you have to have at least your 3.5% down. But if you have your 3.5% down, you can build in the agent's commission if the seller is not willing. You can build in all of the buyer's closing costs. The buyer's only coming up with their 3.5% down. And who cares if the appraisal comes in $70,000 low in this situation? Do not memorize the $70,000 number. I will give you the math. Okay. The point is, you can give a huge appraisal gap. Now you can tell the seller, hey, I want this house to be at $640,000 because we've got to pay $18,000 for my commission and we've got to pay $22,000 in other closing costs. And so I need the price to be $640, and they're going to laugh you all the way to the street. They're going to kick you out. Except you say, yeah, but I'm going to give you an appraisal gap coverage that guarantees that as long as the house appraises for at least $580, you're fine. Are you kidding me? Like, our price was $600. And you're going to tell me that you're going to guarantee a price $20,000 below that, even though your buyer doesn't have the money to pay their own closing costs? Now, this is going to take a sales job from me, because the seller's agent, the listing agent, is not going to believe you when you say, hey, I need money to pay for the commission. I need money to pay for the closing costs. I got an FHA buyer, but don't worry, they're going to cover $60,000 of a shortage. From where? By the way, the right answer is, well, from the refrigerator, of course. If they watch this video, they would understand what that meant, because it's all about the refrigerator. Because as long as they have their own 3.5% down payment, putting in a refrigerator converts them to a renovation loan. And now I can have a huge gap between what the appraised value is and what the loan amount is. And it gives us so much flexibility. Guys, this is the point. I'm going to stop sharing. I've got 10 minutes left to answer any questions, or we can end early. This is what I wanted to cover with you. This, to me, is the game changer. It is the understanding that I need, and I want you involved in this. I want you, Eric, that client that you're sending to me. When I meet with them, we're going to hop on a Zoom call. You're going to be on that Zoom call with us, and we're going to have this conversation together so that you understand what I've told the buyer. The buyer has heard it from me. You can repeat it back to them, and then you and I can tag team the listing agent, because this will be a sales job, okay? But if we offer them a high enough net, if they wanted 600,000 and we're asking for 18,000 for you and 22,000 for closing costs, and you go, you know what? We'll actually raise the price to 650. You'll get an extra $10,000 as a tip, Mr. Seller, just for your troubles. I'm not saying that's a good deal for the buyer or not. That's up to them. Doesn't change the numbers very much. But the key is You understand how this works. I understand how this works. We had a conversation with the buyer together ahead of time. I don't overwhelm them. I've overwhelmed half of you. I'm positive. I'm sorry. I'm willing to do a one-on-one with you afterwards. We can talk through this and understand it better, but I want to give you all of the details of how it works. I'm not going to overwhelm your buyer. I'm simply going to say, this is how it's going to look and this is how it should work. But here's our worst case scenario. Our worst case scenario, if you're a small FHA down payment buyer, is we throw in a refrigerator and you end up actually in a much better position. I got to adjust my camera. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry, guys. My tripod was starting to lean and I knew it was going to fall over, and I'd rather not have my camera fall. Okay, so we are going to explain to them, look, these are this is what it's going to look like. This is your loan. But we can structure it this way if we have to. If the seller's not willing to pay the commission, we can ask them to bump the price. And as long as we make this switch to being a renovation loan, you get a new refrigerator, maybe it's a washer dryer, maybe it's some appliance, a new stove, maybe you really do want to paint the bedrooms, then you hire a painter. Like, I don't care what the work is. Obviously, the more work there is, the more the numbers change a little bit. So we want to keep the work amount small to keep the total payment and cash amount the same. But the truth is, get a little bit of work done on the house, and you now have the ability to offer a significantly higher price, and nobody worries about the appraisal coming in low. So therefore, we offer that high price, and we expect the appraisal is going to come in at that price, and most of the time it does. We only use local appraisers that are handpicked. That's a game changer. We don't let the appraiser decide what market they're going to appraise in. We handpick our appraisers. I can't say which appraiser is going to go to this house, but my company has handpicked everywhere up and down the state the best appraisers in that market, and those are the ones that we choose from in our random pool. All right. So Beth says, man, there's a lot going on here. Let's see here. Yes, I'm going to send recordings. Beth says, want to copy the recording. A lot going on here. I was with Beth Logan at first. Kathy says, yeah, there is a lot. And I wanted to show you so you can watch through the video again. I went into grave detail. I'm going to repeat the simplified version of this. You need your buyers to be working with a lender who can offer commission gap strategies at pre-approval. That is step one. Your lender has to be having that conversation to offer commission gap strategies. The hope is we don't need it, but we have to have a plan B. And the plan B is, what if the seller says they're not willing to pay the commission? What do we do? And ultimately, I would show them the worst case scenario and say, look, this is the worst case scenario. Now I'm going to ask you to send me ahead of time your buyer broker agreement for that buyer that you're sending to me. I want to know what the numbers are. I want to be able to have a real conversation. Hey, you and Beth, you and Kathy, you and Eric negotiated X. And so here's what happens if the seller's not willing to pay any of that X. Here's the worst case scenario. Are you comfortable with that worst case scenario? For most buyers, we don't have to do the crazy refrigerator thing. That's only for our small down payment FHA buyers. Okay. For most buyers, they simply put a little bit less down. I can show them, hey, it cost you an extra $1,500. It cost you an extra $3,000 in one-time fee if we did this and the property didn't appraise for the higher price. So we have that conversation ahead of time. And then if you end up in a position where the seller says, I'm not willing to pay, you have the ace in the hole ready to say, let's negotiate the price up and let's give an appraisal gap. And we will have already talked about what we think the appraisal gap should be. And you're going to call me as you're writing that counteroffer and say, John, here's what we got. Here's what we're countering. What's your thoughts on how much of a gap we can offer? Because I'd like to make it look even better to the seller. I'd like to offer a bigger appraisal gap, because most of the time, once we're digging into a gap, once we have to cover any gap, we can cover a pretty big gap for the same cost. So why not offer all of it? Because the truth is, you don't control, none of us control how much the appraiser is going to appraise the property. So by offering a bigger gap, it does not mean that you are creating a scenario where the seller or the buyer is likely to have to use that full amount of the gap, but it makes the seller feel better. Because the fact is, this is about feelings. It's not about numbers, because by raising the price, you're giving them the number that they wanted. So it's not about math. It's about feelings, and the feeling they have is fear. The feeling they have is the fear the transaction's not going to close. The feeling they have is the fear that you're going to renegotiate. The feeling they have is the dread of having to do open houses again and get back on the market, and maybe we should take the offer that's the sure thing. You have to take away that fear from the seller. And it starts with you and I together taking that fear away from your buyer. From you and I together helping your buyer understand there's ways that you don't have to pay the commission for your realtor, the compensation. I think I'm not supposed to say commission. I don't care. I'm not part of it, so I can say whatever I want, but I don't think you're supposed to say commission anymore. Anyway, you are the fee. I don't know what word we're supposed to use. The point is, we need to have that conversation early. We need to have that conversation often. And I'm interviewing to be your lender to help you make that happen and to make this easier so that you can not only get paid every single time, but that you can make sure that you can write offers on homes even when the seller says they're not willing to pay. So that's a critical thing in the market that we're heading into. So guys, I really appreciate it. We're headed up on to 2 o'clock. If there's any questions, feel free to unmute or to post into chat. I'll be here for a quick minute. Otherwise, y'all can disappear. And Eric, I'll give you a call. And everybody else, you owe me a text message. Kathy, your dog's coming in. Anyway, you guys owe me a text message with a lead, because that's the cost of admission today. I am just kidding, but I am interviewing to be your lender, so be clear. All right, guys, doesn't look like there's any questions. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be sending out the video. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Great news. Thank you.
All right, bye.